pretty high tech. There we go. Now we're live. Hello, everyone. How's it going? Hope you're having a great night. Welcome to 2021. It's good to be out of 2020 and here's for bigger and better things as we move into the new year. For now, of course, we're still doing these slideshows remotely. Hope you're all doing well out there. For those of you who don't know me, I am Kyle Cush, the archive technician at the Arrow Historical Society, and we hold archival material from all around the Arrow Lakes and Upper Lardo regions. Our area covers parts of the traditional territories of the Scenic, Syilx, and Tanaha people, so we're thankful for that. And tonight's show is going to be a little interesting. This is actually the second ever show that we ever did back in 2014. And it was called History Comes Alive. It was a show that was basically the best of what we got in the year 2014. Now, part of that material was actually used to build the Our Colored Past slideshows, which became the Our Colored Past DVD and the Our Colored Past book eventually. But a lot of it is very important for other reasons. Particularly, that year was the year that we received over 4,600 negatives from the Arrow Lakes News collection. That year we received hundreds of photos from the Nelson Daily News collection. And that was also the year we started digitizing the Milton Parent negative collection. So a whole bunch of things came to us that year, and since it's been a few years since we've looked through all of those wonderful objects, I figured we should do that here tonight in our show, which we call History Comes Alive, because it was as generic as title as I could possibly think of. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. One correction from the last show, I think I pointed out the Grainwall family in the hot springs pool in the Ueda film. It wasn't Charlie Grainwall and Kurt Grainwall. It was Charlie Grainwall and Michelle Grainwall. So a little correction there. Thank you, Wendy. And I also want to shout out the Narrow Arrows channel on YouTube. 3 more interesting short little Super 8 clips from the 60s and 70s have been uploaded. We have a Gymkhana at Burton in 1971, I believe. We have the construction of the Fokir Motel in 1968. And a short little 50-second clip of ice hockey being played on Lower Arrow Lake right in front of the Fokir ferry landing. So the Narrow Arrows on YouTube. Check that out. Again, thank you all for coming, and I believe you're ready to get going, so without any further ado, History Comes Alive! Hooray! That boat you see on the title card is the tug Vantoria, and you can see a bunch of people gathered. This is an excursion to St. Leon Hot Springs in 1924. And you can see Eugene Levesque is the one holding the baby at center, and right above his head is the Leland Hotel. So that gives you an idea of where that is. We have a shot here of what the Nakusp waterfront looked like in 1909. A really cool shot. This came to us from our own Bruce Rohn. So you can see how busy that shipyard is and how busy the wharves are. So that's the CPR wharf right in the middle. You can see up at on the right the Leland Hotel and the slightly smaller Grand Hotel. And over on the train station's over on the left, just left of center, and then right above it is the F.W. Jordan store, which was the first ever building built in Nakusp in 1892. I'm just going to shrink my window over here so I can actually see the chat should any of you decide to chat today. So just forgive me here for a second as you see all my internet stats there for a brief second. This is a great little postcard that shows you what Halcyon Hot Springs looked like in 1912. Again, a pretty ornate, a pretty ornate looking hotel. The pools are inside. You see the water bottling plant and the boiler room below the hotel, and then the boathouse and the wharf at the bottom. And you'll notice the donor of the photo was Mrs. Celia Dawson. I actually got to go to her house and explore her collections that day, and that was one of the photos within that, of course. Halcyon Hot Springs was famous for having working mules. Not working horses, working mules on the Hot Springs property at the resort. And here's one of those mules in June of 1944. And of course, that would have been one of the mules belonging to General Fred Burnham, who was the owner and proprietor of the Hot Springs for over 30 years. Just down the lake was St. Leon Hot Springs, and this was Mike Grady, who built the hotel at St. Leon Hot Springs in 1903, 1904. He made his fortune at the Standard Mine in Silverton, and used that money to turn the Hot Springs into a resort. And he remained at the Hot Springs right up until the end of the 30s, when he became too old to take care of them, unfortunately. Another great shot of the springs there. And the St. Leon Falls in the background. Nakusp Hot Springs, not quite as ornate as Halcyon or St. Leon. They didn't have their own grand resort hotel. Instead, they had cabins. The Hot Springs were, at this time in 1932, a Class C provincial park, operated by a community-run parks board. So admission fees to the springs were used to help pay for a caretaker and maintain the rustic facilities there. A few cabins, an outhouse, later a roundhouse would be built. And later this year, we will have the next in our Portable History series, Memories of Old Nakusp Hot Springs. So watch for that this summer. Another one from Bruce Roan's collection, a great shot of the SS Nakusp. Yes, there was an SS Nakusp before there was an SS Minto. And there it is. This is on the Columbia River, and this is somewhere around Trail. And again, a pretty neat ship, and a rare photo of the SS Nakusp actually in action. This is a tugboat that was owned by Andy Simons. A lot of people are familiar with Big Ledge across the lake from Nakusp. The name of the mountain that Big Ledge is on is Mount Simons, named after Andy Simons, who actually lived at Fosthall, of all places. Yes, there was an actual town site laid out at one point at Fosthall, although it never really actually developed into a town. There were a few houses and attempted orchards and farms there, but it never really caught on. But there was even a little school there for a short time, I believe. Moving further up the lake, again from the Bruce Roan collection, the Langell House. They're distant relatives of the Langells that we know from Edgewood. This is a great shot of the Langell House during flood season, as you can tell by the flooded trees in the background. Today it's a pretty smooth ride all the way to Nelson. we don't even really have to deal with that many switchbacks anymore. Well, here's how the highway first started. This is building the highway above Brock's Lake in the 1910s. All those long, tall, narrow pines that you drive past had to be blasted through. And the road's a bit larger than this nowadays, of course. That's how it all started. You can imagine digging through that. Wasn't a lot of dynamite employed on the construction of the Box Lake Highway. Another great postcard. This is an R.H. Truman photo from 1898. And this shows the Rossland, the Minto, and the trail at Arrowhead. The Minto is on the right. The Rossland's actually the larger ship in the middle, and the trail to the little guy at the background. But that is a postcard from 1898. This comes from one of Milton Parent's negatives. This is the SS Kootenai at Nakusp Wharf, if you couldn't tell by what was written on the top of the photo. And as you can see, Milton often got his negatives by taking photos of other people's photos. And in this case, this is a photo that looks like it has been glued to a piece of paper and then nailed to the wall. But it was a way of preserving the photos while letting the original owner of the photos keep the photos. This is a shot of the Nakusp waterfront, 1914. This is the townsfolk coming to welcome the first ever train direct from Kaslo all the way to Nakusp. Before 1914, the Kaslo and Slocan Railway was owned by the Great Northern, which was a rival company to the Nakusp and Slocan Railway, owned by Canadian Pacific. Both of the railways ended in Slocan. You may have, or in Sandon, sorry, in the Slocan Valley. You may have heard of the Great Rail Station War in Sandon, where the employees of the KNS actually tore down the NNS station, as they saw it as rival competition. Eventually, Great Northern went under, and the CPR bought the line. They could join the two lines together, and you could actually travel all the way from Nakusp to Kaslo by train. And so that's what this is a celebration of. This is a fantastic shot of the Bonington at Renata in 1920. And the Bonington was quite a bit bigger than the Minto. As you can see, it had an extra deck. A very grand ship. As we've mentioned before in other shows, it was the sister to the Nasukin on Kootenai Lake and the Sicamous, which you can still visit at Penticton on Okanagan Lake. Another great flood shot. This is the CPR station at Arrowhead, surrounded by floodwaters. The station at Arrowhead was right on the lake next to the CPR wharf, where the trains would meet the sternwheelers. And so, as such, the station was prone to flooding at high water, as you can see here, where a tugboat is actually pulled up to the balcony, to the veranda. Here it is. Here's the same wharf. The station's behind this photo. This is a great shot. This has been reproduced in a number of different publications, but the original photographer of this shot was Ichiro Shiino, who we all know so well from his photos and movies over the years. And it's a wonderful shot of the train leaving Arrowhead Wharf. The building above it is the old Imperial Bank, which became the Arrowhead Co-op later, and that's up on Front Street. And then downtown Arrowhead is tucked behind the trees. You can just see a few buildings posing out there. Sometimes you'll get donated photo albums, or people will want you to scan entire photos or pages of photo albums, and they'll have multiple photos on them. And the captions and what's written on the pages are just as important as the photos. And this is an example of that. This is a page from the scrapbook of Richard Rogers, who lived at Arrow Park in the 30s. His descendants, the Fairhurst. There is a Fairhurst Creek that is right about Mackinson, in between Arrow Park and Burton. And again, it's not just the photos themselves, but it's just as important to capture your photos and leave the information with them. And this is a perfect example. It's immaculate. I love it when I see photo albums like this, and that black mat actually helps preserve the photos. You notice nothing's glued in. They're all in the little scrapbook photo holders, so none of the photos are damaged either. So pretty fantastic. Some of you may recognize some names such as McGill and Mizera, and even Ray Ude, so Rennie Ude. Going back to Mrs. Dawson and her collection that she was kind enough to donate. These are the Dawson brothers of Burton in 1936, on top of a pile of firewood being pulled by two horses back to the house. Bill Barrow gave us so many photos over the years. Lots of postcards, too. He collected a lot of postcards. And this is a classic shot. Again, this was a shot that was taken by Itchy Shino and was used in a lot of postcards. Such as this postcard, turn of the 1950s or thereabout. You can see this is at Nakusp. If you recognize the mountains in the background, mountain meadow and scalping knife. But the big log boom in the front is definitely something we don't have nowadays. This is a great shot by Eugene Tucker, and we were lucky enough to get this wonderful high-res copy from Malin Jordan back in 2014. This is Nakusp Canyon at June 1906, the Kuskanax Creek. Yes, that is the original Kuskanax Bridge. I probably would not want to drive that. There have been, of course, 4 more bridges built after that one. But that is the original Kuskanax Bridge. And notice, this was a popular picnic place, which is why everybody is posing in their Sunday best amidst this raging canyon water. Another great shot from around the same time, probably about 10 years later, 1910s or so, with the Hankies of Browse posing atop the canyon bridge. Another important transportation artery. The canyon bridge at that time actually led nowhere. The road just kind of petered off a half mile above the Kuskanax Creek. But the Cape Horn Tunnel, which was blasted out in the 1920s, became the main road link between Nakusp and Nelson, and was legendary for its, shall we say, confined roadbed. But of course, the highway is well above the tunnel now, and the tunnel's not that. And in fact, I believe the tunnel's now impassable, even by foot. The Slocan Bluffs, and can you believe that up until 1991, we got to drive the Slocan Bluffs, one lane, back and forth between Nakusp and Nelson, but it wasn't nearly as precarious as it was here in 1929, as taken in this shot by Isabel Morley, who was a school teacher at Browse at Box Lake, and her husband Ben worked on the sternwheelers in Nakusp and up and down around the Arrow Lakes and Kootenai Lake and Slocan Lake for many years. But yeah, I definitely wouldn't want to take a modern 18-wheeler underneath that canopy, that's for sure. Going back all the way to 1902, here's how you got between Trout Lake and Ferguson. This is Andy Daney and his horse team crossing Halfway Creek on the Ferguson Road. And for 1902, that's a fantastically constructed bridge. That's a great shot. Speaking of Trout Lake, or Trout Lake City as it was called in the winter of 1904-1905, probably about the first 20, 30 years of the town, it was called Trout Lake City as opposed to just Trout Lake. You can see the Windsor Hotel at the center there, and you may notice off to the left what looks like some cribbing. That's actually the retaining wall holding back Lardo Creek. In the 1947, they would actually reroute Lardo Creek away from downtown Trout Lake and to about a block over to where its current position is. But yeah, winter in Trout Lake. That's one place where winter hits hard, and you learn to be self-reliant for sure. Cambourne. This is the Queen's Hotel in Cambourne, so high above 15, 20 kilometers north of Beaton in the mid-1900s. And a great shot of the Queen's Hotel. Cambourne was a going concern at this time. It would start petering out in the 1910s. During the Depression, the mine would open up again for the short time. It had a little mini rebirth, and then that was it. By the end of the 30s, Cambourne was a ghost town again, and it's faded into the wilderness. But it's hard to believe when you see hotels the size of this. That even for today, that's a large building in the West Kootenay. Speaking of Cambourne, this is a classic shot of E.J. Branford and Company packing 3,600 feet of wire cable up to the Silver Dollar Mine through the center of Cambourne. And you can see all the burned stumps and trees in the background. And you combine that with just the sheer amount of horses and cable, and then the new buildings on the right. Makes for a pretty interesting photo. And of course, this comes probably off of a glass plate, I imagine, which is why the photo looks so good. Not the best looking photo. This is actually a negative of a postcard. But that's a great postcard. A load of logs at Arrowhead. Definitely wouldn't see a load of logs like this today, let alone carried in such a fashion. Those poor horses. That's all I can say. That seems like animal cruelty. It's a lot of logs. That's actually likely taken across the lake at Galena Bay, which is where the Arrow Lakes Lumber Company that was based in Arrowhead had their depot camp. A bit more modern, as we get into some of the photos that came to us in 2014 from Touchstone's Nelson, a lot of which came from the Nelson Daily News collection. This is the K&R sawmill on the Nakusp waterfront. K&R was an outfit out of Revelstoke, I believe. And this is at the east end of downtown, heading out towards Rothwell Point. It operated at the end of the 50s, beginning of the 60s. But again, it's weird to think of a sawmill being that close to town. On the other side of town, just above where the beach is today, you had the Kearney Pole Yard. Eventually, this pole yard would move to the north side of town, where it is now, behind the Esso. But this is basically right on top of the giant delta that forms below the Nakusp Cemetery. And that pole yard has been in operation either at that location or the current location for pretty well a century. It's gone through a few different names, but it's always been the one continuous operation. This is inside the brand new Columbia River Shake and Shingle Mill in 1974. And this is the first of many photos that we will see from the Arrow Lakes News collection in tonight's show. Again, I can't imagine how anybody lost any fingers at the shake mill. I know a few people. Another great industrial shot. This is at the Newmont. This is the entry portal to the Newmont mine in Trout Lake. Sort of a antecedent to the more recent molybdenum mine. But the Newmont mine operated in the early 80s. And this was from a feature-length article that was written about it. And just one of those great casual shots of workers leaving the mine. A great shot from the Touchstones collection that we received. I think everybody in Nakusp would know and probably frequent this gas station today. This was then a BA, it then became a Gulf, and then a Petrocan, and then a Sun Valley, and today it is Anderson's AFD. This building was built in 1949. It started as Ward's garage, and then Hill and O'Brien took it over, I believe, at the end of the 50s. But it's weird to see it without the awning over the gas tanks. But that is very much the same building. Another great business shot. This is inside Joy's Red and White store, which was one of the two supermarkets that Nakusp had at the beginning of the 1960s. And you can see Bob Joy in the background there. And Vicky Barrow over on the right, Gladys Hill up front. This is where the general store is now today. This was a supermarket, either as a Red and White or as an IGA, right until the end of the 70s. And you might be able to tell where the meat counter is, because that's now where the office is at the back of the general store. 1962, a new entrant comes into the grocery game in the greater Nakusp area, and that's Marshall's Hilltop Grocery, which is still around today as the Hilltop Convenience Store. But as you can see, this is before the addition was put on. The gas pumps are in a completely different location. When Ken and Marilyn Marshall opened the store, it also served as the last Browse post office, even though it was technically in Glenbank. This was the last Browse post office. All those wagon wheels that you see in the front of the photo, Ken actually took from the Big Bend, Selgar's Big Bend Mill on the waterfront, which was closing down at the time, and they had a lot of those old wagons from the horse-drawn days lying around, so he took those wagon wheels and made for a pretty cool fence. And don't forget, you can get a 4-piece place setting of fine china for just 99 cents with 7 gallons of gas. There's what Overweighty looked like at around the same time. This is the building that was demolished in the mid-70s and replaced in 1978 with the current incarnation of CIBC. Overweighty moved to its current location in 71. And the cenotaph that you see there was moved in the mid-60s. So that's actually one of the last shots of the cenotaph in front of Overweighty. I wish somebody had hung on to that vintage green teapot sign. Here's a great shot of the Arrow Lakes Hospital, early 50s, 1960s, and of course, front and center is B. Anton, who we already missed too much already, and of course she was the X-ray tech, radiology tech, and there's all the staff sitting on the veranda. Of course, this building is now where Halcyon House is, and another great shot. We have not been able to point out exactly where this is. We think this is Nakusp. We know that the butcher's name is Bob Chatley. This is sometime in the late 60s or early 1970s, because these 60 millimeter negatives were what what the Arrow Lakes used between 1968 when they started taking photos and 1975 when they switched to 35 millimeter. So we know it's around that time, but we don't know what store this is. So if anybody, or even if this is Nakusp, it could be New Denver. You never know. So if anyone can help us with that, much appreciated. Yep, and shout out to Roof and Arena in the chat. Thanks for joining us tonight. Here is opening day at the Hut Drive-In in 1968. When you drive by the Hut today, the sign says since 1970. That's not true. It opened in 1968. But it's definitely wasn't landscaped the way it is now. As you can see, there's even still piles of dirt in the front. And the big tree over in the right corner, which stood there for so many years, even after it got diseased and they trimmed it all. They couldn't... It took... they left it up there just because that tree held so many memories for so many people. I know I had so many milkshakes and ice creams underneath that tree. Eventually, they did have to take it down, and they replaced it with the covered dining area that's there in front of the Hut today. But yeah, even the four-legged ones couldn't resist visiting the brand new Hut on its first day. We fast forward 5 more years. Here is Bobby Nowak and Brian Bielefeld 1 week before they opened the Lord Minto restaurant, July 1973. At this point, the Minto was meant to be just an ice cream parlor and a delicatessen. It would be a year later that it would switch to the steak, pizza, casual dining theme that it held for the rest of its existence. Of course, that became Nick's Place, and it is now a dog grooming studio, but this was the original Presbyterian/United Church inside Nakusp, and just classic 70s hair all over this photo. Classic 70s jeans, classic 70s belt buckles. 1981. Hi, Karen. Karen's gonna go, oh, you little brat, why are you showing me this? But just a great shot. This is, every year they would put in the Arrow Lakes News 4 to 8 page feature spread on the Arrow Lakes News, and they would have all these yearly reports from the different departments and the hospital board and the doctors, and of course they'd have all these casual pictures of the staff. And there's Karen, who was the medical records tech at the time, in her office, and then we go inside the kitchen, and I used to know who was in this photo off the top of my head. Now I don't anymore. Of course I have this saved in the database back at the office. I'm not at the office right now, so I can't look this up for you right now. But I'm sure there will be 10 or 15 people just waiting to say, I know who exactly that is. This is a classic shot. This is something that made Nakusp world famous in the end of the summer of 1977, when people were convinced that Nakusp was slowly sinking into the ground. And there we go. Don Kirk is saying that was bar battery in the hospital photo. This is where the first Cal Tire store in Nakusp was. It was the third ever Cal Tire store anywhere. This is, of course, where the vacant lot, the parking lot next to the Seventh-day Adventist Church is now. You can't build there precisely because the ground's unstable. I wonder why. Reading back, a lot of people... There were literally seismology experts and glaciologists and geologists consulting on this who were convinced that, oh, it was a glacial sinkhole and the whole town, could be built on top of these sinkholes. Well, all it was village crew tapping into a well 2 blocks up to the street and draining the water table, just as was originally hypothesized by the landowner, Mrs. Wanstall, and ultimately her her thoughts were vindicated. But this got international. Yeah, Don says bargery, not battery. So I'm guessing autocorrect strikes again. So this actually, I'm not kidding, made Nakusp world famous in August 1977. Everybody was talking about this mystery sinkhole that swallowed the Cal Tire store. We'll get into some school photos now, and thankfully I actually was smart enough to put some captions on here, so I know who all the people in these photos are. And some long-time Edgewood names here. Jordans and Forslands and Watsons and Simcox and McLeods and Ennis. The Fire Valley School was not the school that was in the Edgewood town site. It was the one that was torn down 2 years ago out on In and Oakland Valley Road, opposite Robinson Road. So there was a school for the town kids and a school for the valley kids. And this is a class photo there. Some very dapper looking young students. Forest Glen School. So at what was called Forest Glen and then around this time became Glen Devon. Glen Devon, for those who do not know, was located opposite modern day Arrow Park, opposite the Rock Island Ranch, about halfway between the modern Arrow Park ferry landing and Saddle Mountain. And yeah, as you can see, not the largest school class, but a number of families came from Glen Devon. The Miskulins, the Coateses came from Glen Devon. The Haldersons came from Glen Devon. And this school would serve Glen Devon and Bird's Landing. Bird's Landing is where the current Arrow Park ferry lands on the west side of the lake. This is a great shot of Nakusp School in 1936, and can you tell this came out of a scrapbook based upon the crinkle cut to scissoring? It's a great shot. And I'll let you just ruminate on this photo here for a few seconds as you read some of the names and try to match them with the faces. Don't forget, of course, if it goes by a bit too fast, you can always come back and watch the video later and pause it at your will. But just a nice little class shot. This is the Galena Bay School, and this is a school picnic, June 1945. And so you have some students and some adults, a nice little mix of the Galena Bay School. And of course, it's crazy to think how many people lived at Galena Bay back in the 40s. But there's actually, it's not like there are that many more people than that are at Galena Bay now. It's just that Galena Bay now is more of a recreational property ownership and such, so you don't have the families there like you used to here back when it was more of a farming and logging town. And interesting note, Charlotte McMecken, who was the teacher at Galena Bay School, well, about 3 decades later, her nephew Phil would sort of return the family to the Arrow Lakes once he began teaching at Burton, where he taught for so many decades. So yes, that Charlotte McMecken is related to the McMeckens that are around now. Here's the Nakusp High School grad class, 1950. And it's in the 50s where the classes really do start getting pretty big in Nakusp. Where you go from just 2 or 3 teachers to needing 7 or 8, and eventually once you get into the 70s, you've got anywhere from 12 to 20 teachers, depending on the year. And so the grad classes, which used to be 4 and 5 and 6, start getting into the teens, and by the time you get into my era, they start getting into the 30s and 40s and even 60s one year. But this is 1950. Uh, Speaking of one of those first large grad classes, 1973, and well, you can definitely pick out some modern Nakuspians in here. Already, I see Terry Warren, Dale Weatherhead, and Tom Zelznick here. Unfortunately, it's a side view, so you keep missing out on a lot of people's faces. But it's a pretty neat shot, and some fantastic 1973 mutton chops for sure. This is an interesting shot that came out of the paper in 1983. This was the time of the Solidarity movement in British Columbia, where the social credit government of the day, Bill Bennett, was feuding with the organized labor movement. And so you had lots of different strikes going around the province. And so this was a one-day teachers' strike in 1983. But as you can see here, some students still showed up. This is a shot from a collection of Halloween photos. This is a roll of negatives from Nakusp Elementary School in 1981, and this one we put up on Facebook a few months ago for Halloween, and it spread all over pretty quick as people tried to identify the various kids. So I think you can still go up to our Facebook page and scroll down and look and view the conversations that ensued as everybody tried to point out all these 5 and 6 year olds in this photo. But there's a lot more Halloween photos in this collection where that came from, and I think you can look them up on our site, and you can find even more incriminating photos of people that are now in their late 40s and early 50s. Like this. Yeah, so I know a couple people in this shot. I yeah. And I can see, yeah, you can tell it's 1981, well, because somebody's dressed as Donna Summer in the top right, and of course, just lots of wacky costumes. Going back to 1948, this is an itchy shot from inside the Legion Hall. This is the Lars Larson Band with Robbie Obayashi and Bill Barrow and the back of Winnie Murphy at the piano. But yeah, there used to be a number of small brass bands that formed in the Nakusp over the years. And of course, the Legion Hall, famous for its dances, and this is a great shot. Again, I've shown this to other people where people were able to pick out folks. I think somebody identified the bottom left as Harry and Winnie Murphy. But that is inside the Legion. Also 1950. This is the Queen of the Arrow Lakes float. So this is the second ever Queen float. Of course, now we call it the Ambassador Pageant. So Vicky Obayashi, who we saw as Vicky Barrow a few slides ago in working at Joy's store. That is her as queen at the back of the float, and then you have Hazel Harridge and Peggy Annis as the new queen candidates at the front of the float, and Hazel Harridge would go on to be crowned queen that afternoon. Nowadays, they have the pageant a few days before the Canada Day. They used to actually have it as part of the ceremonies inside the rec ground. I've used shots of the toy car merry-go-round in other slideshows before. This is a great shot. This is when they were pretty much brand new, and as you can see by the quite nice paint jobs. But yeah, those would be fun for the little kids, I think. But you'd have to do a lot of repair work to those cars. A couple shows ago, I showed some still shots on the Ueda family home movies of the 1958 Old West robbery reenactment, which is not May 1st. It was April 19th, somewhere around there. But this is Rodney Bruce playing the parson, and Peter Hurry playing the bank robbery victim. And, of course, all the onlookers. And this is an actual reenactment shot, a still shot. The photo was taken by Willie Frick, who was known as Pitcher Willie. And he was a photographer, active, in Nakusp in the 50s and 60s. And I believe his camera is in the museum. Yeah, he captured a lot of these historic moments around Nakusp around that time. So Itchy wasn't just doing it alone. There were definitely other photographers around, like Willie Frick and Joel Molnar and people like that. So they turned the Broadway Cafe, as you can see, into a saloon. And eventually they catch the quote-unquote culprit, and they actually hang him from the neon sign hanging at the top of the Broadway Cafe to end the reenactment. Which is a questionable taste. A couple of the reenactors, Jim Drummond, who used to run Drummond's Cabin and a general store down at Carol's Landing, and Mrs. Davies, seated in front of the Broadway Cafe, which was called Diamond Lil's Saloon for the purposes of the reenactment. And, of course, you can't have a bank robbery without a getaway. And so there's Richard Fallman driving the wagon as the gunman tries to escape. Some more parade shots from the Pitcher Willie collection. We have the Nakusp Badminton Club. I guess historical records weren't as well kept back then because they don't actually know when they formed. As you can see by the sign at the left. Going to... The parade would end inside the rec grounds, and so here's the Queen float from that year with Patsy Hascarl, Amy Anagasawa, Linda Henderson, who you all know as Linda Williams, and Carolyn Baskerville. So that's just a nice little shot there, and of course the vintage Crozat, the vintage glasses. A little more humble of a float, a little more cardboard based, is this nice little rendition of the SS Minto, as created by the Nakusp Centennial Committee for the 71 parade. The Vernon Girls Trumpet Band used to be a regular fixture of the parades in Nakusp, alongside other bands like the Kootenai Kilties and the Maple Leaf Band. There's the Broadway Cafe in the background, as it looks like when it's not being used as an Old West saloon. Here are some uncooperative horses. So this was supposed to be the Pony Express, as they called themselves. But I guess this one horse got a little bit agitated, and as you can see, it's kicking up a bit of dust and causing a bit of a storm. And you can't have a July 1st without logging sports, and here's some still shots of loggers in action, so a bit more high res than the shots that we saw in the last slideshow last month. I could not imagine digging a hole into the arena parking lot nowadays to pull off an event like this. I don't think that would go over too well, especially now that it's paved. But yeah, a giant pit of water, I assume. I'm hoping there's water in that hole for them to land in if they fall off. My mom picked out something like 15 people in this crowd when I showed her this one night as I was trying to organize all these photos, and I was looking for some names. Of course, we know the people on the float. That's Joyce Yano, is now Joyce Hanson, and Laura Williams. But yeah, a lot of modern day Nakusp folks, people that are still around, are lurking in that crowd, and I'll let you pick them out. I can recognize a couple already. This is a great shot. This is the winning car in the Nakusp Demolition Derby that used to take place at the airport right before July 1st. And, of course, the next day, then the winning car would put itself in the parade. So this is Lauren Kerfoot and Dale Weatherhead celebrating their victory, as you can see by the trophies. And that's a fun shot. Oh, wow, and there's wow, that's Bunty Maxfield, the late, great Bunty, standing in front of Gardner Electric in the background. Here's a great shot, the Halcyon Hillbillies. Oh yeah, you'll notice the parade's going in the opposite direction. That demolition car is actually being driven backwards. I want to point this out. It's actually being driven backwards, as you can see, comparing it to the next shot. The parade actually, as we all know, it heads toward the park. Halcyon Hillbillies were a stalwart of the parades for many years. And you still see lots of Halcyon House residents every year in the parade. This is a great one. I'm assuming this is done on top of a loader or a bobcat. This is... or a forklift. Here's the Loma Lumber float. And some fantastic ingenuity. The Heritage Sawmills Parade float. Arnie Heritage driving. And of course, we weren't the only town that had parades. Edgewood and Burton had their parades as well. This is the Edgewood Days Parade, July 1st, 1983. This will be marching down... this would be marching down Killarney Crescent. Heading up towards the Legion Hall. This is a shot from a Nakusp Secondary School play in 1981. So if you know of anyone that was in Nakusp Secondary School in the early 80s and participated in the drama club, let me know. Maybe we can identify some of the people in this photo. But some pretty great costumes, some pretty great reenactment. Who knows? They may actually be playing. I don't know. The Nakusp Wheeland Hotel baseball team. This is sometime in the 1920s, and again, the Jordans, the Sutherlands, the Harridges, Bulgers, Anthonys, Levesques, all these names of early Nakusp that are so prominent. And baseball, not hockey, was the big sport in Nakusp for most of its first 70, 80 years. It really wasn't until the arena got built in 1970 that hockey finally took over as the #1 sport. But there was a lot of baseball that came out of this valley, and that gives me the opportunity to plug J. Dal Ma's site, our own J. Ma, at theplate.com, which is pretty much the go-to spot for Western Canadian baseball history, and lots of Kootenay and Arrow Lakes content on that site as well. This is a great shot of skiing at Summit Lake during the Arrow Lakes Winter Follies, which was the annual carnival that used to take place in each February at Summit Lake. And there actually was a Winter Follies parade that would go through town, and then everybody would head over to Summit Lake and go skiing and watch skiing, and as we saw in the last month's show, even play hockey on the lake and watch snowmobile racing. And indeed, there are the Stanleys ready to go to the Arrow Lakes Winter Follies. They're ready. Are you? This is a nice little action shot of baseball at Donsler Park in Edgewood. And obviously that is a foul tip, judging by the trajectory of that ball. I mentioned the Demolition Derby before. Well, there it is. This ran for a handful of years, and I seem to remember as a child it being pretty popular. And who doesn't love to see stuff just get wrecked for no reason? It blowed up real good. Another great action shot. This is a great shot of the Chuck Wagon race on the opening day of the brand new Arrow Lake Saddle Club grounds in Burton, 1981, Lakeview Park Road. And just a great action shot. I love that one. Edgewood, the Lions Club at Edgewood used to hold wacky canoe races in an Oakland Creek. And so you basically had to navigate an obstacle course via canoe. And you had to perform tasks such as jumping through an inner tube while landing in the canoe, back in the canoe and not in the creek, as a bunch of jerks sitting on a bridge tried to pour water all over you to get you to slip and fall into the creek. As you can see, these competitors were not successful. Figure skating carnival. That is a adorable young Fergusiano in the front there. But there we go. February 85 at the arena in Nakusp. And there is a great shot. This is actually a shot that was taken for the carnival program. And if you go to our website, you can follow through. We have a link to where we have posted a whole set of Nakusp Figure Skating Club carnival programs. All the way from the 80s to the 2000s. And they are hosted thanks to the British Columbia Regional Digitized History Project, bcrdh.ca. So if you go to bcrdh.ca, just look us up and type in Nakusp Figure Skating Club. And you'll find all of these programs digitized. And you can browse through years and years of cute little munchkins such as these, who, to give away my age, I all went to school with. This is a great shot of the Nakusp Minor Hockey Team, 1982. I definitely know that there will be people watching in our socially distanced audience live at the Arrow Lakes Archives who will be immediate relatives of some of the people in this photo. But again, I encourage you to, if you're from here and you're around at this time, you can probably pick out a lot of these people. I know I can pick out a good number of them as well. But yeah, just a great shot, and love those smiles. Here's a great aerial photo of Nakusp. This would be about 1940. And so the actual village town site is at left. And you can see it's just the original town grid, the 8x5 square rectangular grid. And it hasn't even filled in yet. You can see there are 4 blocks that are still just trees. And there's no Columbia Heights, there's no pole yard, there's no highway bypass yet, there's not even any elementary school fields yet. There is a park, as you can see off on the very left, And you'll notice what almost looks like golf course layout. And that's because it was a 6-hole golf course at the time. And then you have Glenbank at center and Browsoff at right. That gives you an idea of how developed and or undeveloped things were in 1940. Fast forward 21 years, you can see those 4 blocks that hadn't filled in, now they've filled in. You see new subdivisions starting to come in on the north side of town. They've already built the Columbia Machinery subdivision. That came in... Columbia Machinery itself was in 54. The subdivision was developed between 54 and 57. Valhalla subdivision, the streets have just been laid out. And you see the first couple of houses going into the Selgar/Hydro subdivision. Spicer's Farm is the big farm that you see right at center. And you can see how dark it is. That's just how rich the topsoil was and thus how dense the vegetation grew. You see the old highway running along the waterfront as well. Glenbank up at top. Here is a shot of the wharf at Edgewood, specifically the boathouse on the wharf. You'll notice there are a couple of signs on it, and that's because this is taken on the day of the last sailing of the SS Minto to Edgewood. One sign saying that if you can't build us... basically, if you're going to leave us stranded here with no ship, at least build us a highway. And then the second one, sort of more of a memorial sign for the Grand Old Lady of the Lake, the SS Minto. And of course, stacked up against the side of the boathouse, Revelstoke Light Beer. Here's a look at the Nakusp shipyard and Bay Street, the east end of Bay Street, winter of 1964. This is taken basically from right below where the McPhee House is today, on the switchback heading down from the Leland Hotel to the waterfront. The big CPR workshop at center, which seems to pop up in every slideshow just because, well, it was the most prominent building on the waterfront. I've mentioned it many times before. That was the last building moved off the waterfront. That's now Nakusp Mobile Mechanics. And you can see the houses that were at the end of Bay Street. Yes, people did live on the waterfront. It wasn't just industrial. And then Spicer's Farm in the background. Here is the brand new Fauquier town site. 1967, under construction. And then you have some hydro personnel looking over the new town site. So, before the current Fauquier town site was built, much of this land that the town site was built on was the Seminuk farm, and then pieces of other farms as well. Fauquier wasn't a coherent town site with streets and a grid, and it was more of a collection of farms gathered around the ferry landing. Needles was the more condensed, traditional-looking town site. But Fauquier was flatter, and so Hydro deemed it to be the more advantageous location for constructing a new town site. And pretty much all of those houses that you see being built or that were moved there in this photo are all the houses that constitute the town site today. Other things that were moved off the waterfront. The Selgar office. This is them actually lifting the Selgar office so they could move it a couple hundred meters up the hill. But they had to sort of switchback it. So it actually wound up being a fairly involved relocation because you had to take it to a completely different bench of land, and it was quite a sizable building. Amazingly, they moved it without breaking a single window. Here it is being carted onto the highway. You can see how enormous this building is. It dwarfs the roadway. It dwarfs all the cars in the roadway. They had to tear down all of the hydro lines above it. As you can see, that the power lines on the right have been pulled off of that hydro pole. That is still used as the Interfor office today. Here they are moving it into place, getting it across the highway into its new location. Yeah, quite a concerted effort. People will recognize this house at the corner of 4th Street and 10th Avenue. Marilyn Massey's house. This was the Edwards house originally. Then it became the Jordan house, Ron Jordan's house. Ron Jordan was the woods manager for Selgar, so naturally it was convenient for him to own the house that was right next to the Selgar office at Rothwell Point, the one that we just saw moved. And so not only was the Selgar office moved, but the Jordan house itself was moved. And again, they had to, you can see the cherry picker having to push up. They didn't take down the lines, but they did push them up over the building. But it must have been quite the sight to see something like that coming down the middle of Broadway. Notice on the left, sidewalks are not paved. No paved sidewalks until the cobblestones were put in 1980. And there's the classic shot of the CPR workshop being moved off the waterfront and all the slash being burned behind it. You can just see how much is leveled around it. Stunning shot. Another Selgar office relocation shot, just to show you how far they had to switch back it. You can see the Leland Hotel at back center. And yes, Bay Street was not paved. So a pretty muddy, rutted road. Then they had to grade everything. They had to level everything so they could put that soil erosion blanket. Because it was all beach sand. And they were worried that the fluctuations of the new reservoir would erode away at the bench that Nakusp sits on. So that's why you have that concrete blanket on the waterfront to protect that from eroding away. But of course they had to grade it to a 8-to-1 ratio first so that they could have a level blanket. Edgewood, this is one of the more stunning shots of the collection because you just see this cenotaph ripped off its face. The cenotaph that was there to memorialize the war dead of Edgewood. And it looks a bit more destroyed here than it actually was. What they did was they actually removed the individual blocks, numbered them, and then rebuilt the cenotaph in the new community park. But you can go down there at low water, and you'll be able to do this in March and April, once the snow's gone, but the lake hasn't come up left. And if you go to where Dump Beach is now, Old Edgewood, you can actually stand on top of this cenotaph base. We did that in a field trip, August 2016. This is a painful shot. This is the ruins of the Gates of St. Leon Hotel at St. Leon Hot Springs, shortly after it was mysteriously burned to the ground in November 1968. And that is a very, 65 years of history. That huge, beautiful hotel gone and ruined. There's the smoldering ruins. You can actually still see the smoke coming off of it. Now, officially, no cause. A lot of people suspect arson, given that was, there were a lot of agencies in a hurry to clear the new lake bed in advance of the rising waters of the dam. But, here's the head of from the brand new Highway 23, and then as you can see, it says these properties are still owned by the Gates of St. Leon Limited. Road and building closed. Don't drive down. The Gates family weren't the only ones dismayed for the coming of the dam and the rising of the lakes. I would say there were thousands of people who were not too excited. And even after people were relocated, they were still fighting for their rights and what they saw as the unfair compensation for what they got for their land. This is Carl Schwarzenauer of Deer Park, who was forcibly relocated to Robson. He felt he was shortchanged by quite a few $1,000s, which was a lot back in 1969 for his land at Deer Park, because he had various trap lines and such. He was still fighting hydro the following year when he passed away in 1970 from pneumonia, I believe. As you can see, in front of his new house at Robson, he's created all of these homemade signs, and I encourage you to read them. The spelling, of course, is interesting, but that makes them all the more endearing. Bruce Rohn tells me that Mr. Schwarzenauer was going to bury himself in sand and let the water come over his head before he would leave his house. A more lighthearted shot. This is the attempted construction of the In Oakland Fishway, which is a project to get fish up and around the Inn in Oakland Falls at Edgewood, and so you can see them building and clearing some spawning beds here. I mentioned the brand new Highway 23. Construction on it started in 67, 68, sort of following after the logging road that was built between the Cusp and Galena Bay in the late 1950s. But there was no official highway between Galena Bay and the Cusp until the turn of the 1970s, and this is the final paving of it in 73, when it was completed. At the same time, with a new highway, you no longer need a ferry that goes all the way from Nakusp to Arrowhead. You only need it from Galena Bay to Arrowhead. And they also expected a lot more traffic. Now there's a highway that you could actually drive from all the way from Nakusp to Revelstoke. So with the shorter ferry and expected increased traffic, it was time for a new ferry to replace the tiny 10-car MV Lardo. So here's the brand new MV Galena. And this is the christening ceremony, May 1969. Launched at Nakusp. So here's a rare shot of the Galena Bay ferry. The view of the Leland Hotel from the Galena Bay ferry. It only ever happened once, but it's a great shot. It also gives you a shot of the brand new erosion barrier, only a year old at this time, and the steps that go up the barrier, and the rose arbor where the Spicer Gardens are now. One of the things that Hydro did do for Nakusp was construct a public beach on the site of the old Big Bend sawmill. But when it was first built, as you can see, it wasn't cleared all the way. So you had these little trees, and it was a bit more rocky than it was now. A couple years later, they would bring in more sand and make it the sandy beach that it is today. But they had to import that sand first. This is what it looked like in the original days of the public beach. Not quite as manicured as it is now. The current arena dates till 1979, because the previous arena burned in 78. That arena was built in 1970. But originally we were supposed to have an arena in 1953. And here is that arena under construction in 1952. It almost is pretty much finished at this point. Unfortunately, two of the tension wires holding up the superstructure were cut, severed. It collapsed, and official. They never did quite get an official explanation. But here are the ruins in 1953, December, and as you can see, not much to salvage, and so Nakusp went another 17 years before we finally got our arena. This is located at the intersection of what is now 4th Street and 3rd Avenue, right at the bottom of Stevie's Hill. Eventually, a curling rink would be put in there, and right next to it, across the street, would be where the Anglican Church was moved to in 1967. So that gives you an idea of where that is in town. I mentioned the fire that took the arena in 1978, and that's a shot of it there. And as you can see, just melting away the metal facade of the structure. Fortunately, unlike the one that collapsed in 1953, there was insurance on this one, so they were able to start rebuilding right away. And so they actually built it behind the lot, or behind the site of the original arena, back further on the lot, before they even cleared away the ruins of this one. They got going on it right away, and that's why the arena's moved back a bit from the street, and you have that nice big parking lot. The parking lot is actually where the previous arena was. Speaking of fires, of course, coming from the Arrow Lakes News, all these pictures of house fires and such, as they traveled around to cover all the stories. And this is a pretty dramatic shot of a firefighter attending the house of Wayne Pearson in 1970. A lot of smoke billowing out of the top of that house. This was the Can house, the Can family house, 1972, and they lost the whole house and had to rebuild from scratch. A pretty tragic loss. Fortunately, no lives lost in it, but it did, as you can see, a total loss. Very dramatic sight. This was a very intense fire, probably as an intense a fire as Nakusp has seen. This is Canadian Propane, which was located on Highway 6 out in Glenbank, not too far from where Kim's Customs is now. And as you can see, a propane fire is incredibly intense and hard to extinguish. Chemold Forest Products. This mill was located on the waterfront just south of Nakusp. And this fire was actually spotted from town by Brent Willies, I think. As you can see, another almost total loss. Again, number ignites quickly. This is an interesting one. This is the Nixon house up in Glenbank. The house was saved, although the back porch was scorched pretty good. But this, I believe, is a propane tank that exploded and then fired back at the house. So the propane was firing back at the house, and it burnt up a truck. Sorry, having a little problems with my enunciation today. I don't have. For those of you wondering, I don't have any feeling in the bottom of my jaw, so sometimes I can't tell when I'm forming words. But yeah, they actually did save the house here, so a lot more intense than it actually looked, thankfully. This is a tanker truck accident at Summit Lake in 1983 on the S-curves that used to be south of Summit Lake, between Summit Lake and Hills. And there were nearly 50,000 liters of fuel on this truck. And fortunately, the driver got out, because this truck was a complete loss. Like, just melted into the pavement. This took a long time to clean up. And there's a whole roll of negatives we have of this, where you just see how intense this fire was. Again, with 50,000 liters of gas in it. Here is a landslide near Burton. Boy, aren't we familiar with those. It's happened a few times over the years. This was 1984. Pretty close to where the one that happened earlier in the 2010s was. Lloyd Bargery's mail truck is stuck behind that slide at the top. So he was actually the first one let through once the slide was cleared so that the mail could get through. Speaking of Burton, here's a great shot of the Burton Hotel in the 1930s. It would have been called the Kootenai Hotel at the time. And you can see that nice ornate balcony. That was removed so that the hotel could be moved closer to the highway in 1946. And of course, ultimately 20 years after that, it would be torn down when the old Burton town site was demolished. This is a shot of a Pythian Sisters banquet at the Knights of Pythias Hall in Nakusp, 1923-1924. The K of P Hall was on the back of the lot where Save On Foods is now. So if this building was around today, I could literally just look out the door of where I'm at right now and boom, there it would be staring me in the face. You'll notice that it is how long it took people to pose for photos because the two fellows in the back look like ghosts. They moved during the exposure of the photo, so the wall actually appears through their chests. And so they kind of look like ghost figures in the background. This is a fun shot of Briar Rosebud and Prince Charming inside the Glenbank School in the early 1910s. So May Bill and Joe Kirk. And of course, May Bill, if you've ever read Welcome Home by Stuart McLean, he explores this a bit. And there's an interesting story behind May Bill, who was adopted by a couple that worked for the royal family at Buckingham Palace. In fact, Ernest Bill, her father, was the head of staff at Buckingham Palace. And the story goes is that she may have been an illegitimate child of royalty sent off to another part of the world to keep the scandal hush-hush. And so the Bills were told to adopt her and raise her as their own. That's the theory. That's the urban legend behind May Bill. Yes, people had pet monkeys in Nakusp in the 1930s. And this just so happened to be Lulu, the pet monkey of Eugene Levesque, who opened the first museum in Nakusp in the 1930s. And from what I hear, people tended to be scared of the monkey. I don't know why. Speaking of Eugene Levesque, there's his grandson, Milt Parrott, and the Beauvette twins, Doug and Don, and Arden Ron at Nakusp in the late 1940s. Here's an interesting shot from New Zealand. And the man there in front with the cigarette is Horace Waterfield, who in 1913 would relocate to Crescent Bay. At this time, he was the assistant to the Lieutenant Governor of New Zealand. Pushing him in the wheelbarrow is his toddler daughter, Jean Waterfield, who would have been a year old at this time. You would know her as Jean Spicer, of Spicer Farm fame. And like I said, they came to Crescent Bay in 1913, lured by the promise of orchard lands. And the Waterfield family is still a cornerstone of Crescent Bay to this day. And there's Jean Spicer, about 60 years later, with one of her pet geese at the Spicer farm. Just a great casual shot. You don't see too many casual shots in the Arrow Lakes News collection, of course, because they're covering news, but there are a few in there. This is a great shot. I was very fortunate back in 2014 to be given a tour of this farm down in Edgewood by Jimmy Mead and Richard Eichenauer in the late 1960s. Who Jimmy came there in 1961. Richard came there a few years later, and this was a great shot she gave me, and I'm assuming this is a reenactment because Richard is still here with us. We saw a shot of the badminton club parade float earlier in the show, and they didn't know when they were formed, as you can see by their float, but we know that it was at least the 1930s because we have lots of shots of the badminton club in Nakusp in the 1930s. So here's the Nakusp and the Edgewood Club together in front of the Opera House, which is now Sean's bike shop. Here is a group traveling at the back of a sled being pulled by Andy Daney and horse through the snow, the very formidable snow that one gets in the winter in Trout Lake. This is Christmas Eve, 1910. And you can see they've all got shovels because at some point they may have to dig themselves out of the snow. Here's another sleighing party. Sleighs, and you can see the sleds and toboggans and the snowshoes. This is on the lake at Arrowhead in the early 1910s. Just a nice shot. It's rare to see a shot of this early with people actually smiling because the camera exposures were so long. So I'm guessing this is probably 1920s, I'm guessing. I'm going to guess late 1910s or 1920s, judging by the clothes. This is a great shot of Alice Jowett, O.B.N. Wilkie, and Dora Wilkie on top of the Silvercup Mountain behind Ferguson, early 20th century. O.B.N. Wilkie, Wilkie Mountain is named after him. Wilkie Creek, that flows into Trout Lake, is named after him. He was a famous surveyor of the day. And Alice Jowett, the longtime proprietor of the Windsor Hotel, prospected until she was 88, lived to be 100, and just one of the classic characters of the settlement days of the Lardo. This is Art Stanley Jr. with the original printing press that the Arrow Lakes News was printed on, starting in 1922, all the way up until the end of the 1960s, when they got a more modern press. They upgraded their typeface and started using more photographs, and so it's time to get rid of the old press. So that is what a newspaper printing press installed here in the 1920s, and probably much older than that, looked like. That must have been a beast to get out of the building. As we come towards the end of the show here, of course, the Rotary Villa is about to introduce its next edition here in a couple months. It basically takes up an entire block and a bit now of Nakusp. But here it all began, in this shot, the groundbreaking 1971. And notice, there's nothing else around it. There's no houses anywhere. You can barely see a street sign in the corner. From this groundbreaking, the amazing Rotary Villa complex began. And there's the actual shovels. Ernie Harding, who was the mayor of Nakusp at the time, he's the fellow in the back with the glasses. And there's the ribbon cutting in 1972. The first resident cut in the background. This is a great shot of the Arrow Lakes Dancers, which was a troupe formed by some high school students in 1984. Linda Larder is in the front. Rosie Lukenda is at the back. I don't know who the other two are, so yeah. But so if anybody has those two names, be sure to chime in. Yes, Trevor, Alice is indeed a true legend. And the monkey scared me a bit too. And oh yes, should point out that that farm where where we saw Jimmy Mead and Richard Eichenauer, that's south of Fauquier, a few kilometers, Apple Grove Road. We mentioned Alice Jowett, who lived to 100. Well, two unrelated Jowetts from the Arrow Lakes that also lived over 100. Walter Jowett and Wilfred Jowett. Walter lived to 106. Wilfred lived to 102. Walter would have already been over 100 in this photo from 1981, and Wilfred would have been in his late 90s. This is 1981 in the parade. By this time, they would have left Edgewood, and they would have moved into the brand new Halcyon home, as it was called at the time. This one's close to my heart because that's my mom pushing Wilfred at left. Or at right, sorry. And we saw Karen before. I forgot I had her in this twice. That's Karen Hamling when she was Karen Rooney. In front of, brand new to Nakusp, and posing in front of the actual Arrow Lakes News building. I don't know what article this was for, but there she is at the Arrow Lakes News. This is a Chamber of Commerce life membership ceremony at Nakusp Senior Citizens Hall in 1985. Okay, we got a comment here. The one in the parasol might be Lorelei Davis. Okay. So we have Bert Gardner, Winnie Gardner, Winnie Murphy, and Harry Murphy. And just a nice little casual shot. And of course, Mr. Murphy has his eyes closed for the photo. And, there's Fergus Yano again, with his mom, and some goldfish that they won at July 1st, 1985. And you can't have a July 1st without Captain Minto. There's Mayor Stan Fellows with Captain Minto in front of the Nakusp Village office. And just a horrific suit to wear in 30-degree heat in July, all day during the July 1st festivities. And there's Mr. Kabatoff, my old shop teacher, with Captain Minto at center. I believe that's Brian Furbank off at left. Karen Halderson, Karen Serena, up at top right, the reigning queen of the Arrow Lakes. And there's a last shot of... we end the show with Captain Minto, with Mr. Robison, Bill Robison, one of the great historical enthusiasts of the region. And so much of our material comes from Mr. Robison. And he was actually co-founder of the society back in 1984. And so that's a good place to end it, I think. Thanks so much for watching tonight, everybody. I thought that was going to be a short one, but here we are, and we wound up at 8:30, as we always do. So, we'll be back again exactly 1 month. So, as I look here, that will be February 19th at 7 p.m. And I hope you had fun, everybody. And again, I encourage you all to visit our website for more photos, alhs-archives.com. And we've got our publications for sale, some great articles. Listen to some interviews. I think you'll be hearing some exciting things happening with our interviews in the next coming months. So stay tuned for that. And until then, good night.